For years, I believed that holding your tongue was a form of strength. As a trauma doctor, I pride myself on staying composed while chaos unfolds around me. But applying that same clinical detachment to my personal life nearly destroyed my career. A year after my marriage dissolved, my former mother-in-law, Nora Vance, cornered me near the hospital elevators on a crowded afternoon. With a venomous smile, she announced to the surrounding staff that discarding me was the finest thing her son had ever done, especially now that he shared a newborn boy with my former closest friend. Nora expected me to crumble right there in my scrubs, but I simply stared at her with the steady pulse of a surgeon. For 6 years, her family had quietly circulated a rumor that I was the defective one who could not provide a family, a falsehood I had foolishly tolerated to preserve the peace. I calmly asked her if that was truly what she chose to believe, right before a man she never anticipated seeing walked through the glass doors. That single confrontation set off a chain reaction that would soon force their darkest family secrets into a court of law. Growing up in a tight-knit working-class community, I learned early on to let my labor speak for itself rather than fighting public battles. I carried that mindset through the grueling years of medical school and eventually into my role as a senior emergency physician, where the sterile scent of antiseptic always felt like a sanctuary. In the trauma bay, facts mattered, outcomes were measurable, and nobody ever accused me of being inadequate or incomplete. Yet that very habit of internalizing burdens became my greatest vulnerability when the people I trusted began rewriting my character to shield themselves. I had married Owen Vance believing his charismatic public persona reflected his true nature, but our inability to conceive a child eventually cracked that illusion. After 2 years of trying, I suggested we both undergo standard reproductive screening, a routine measure I initiated for patients every single week. Owen flatly refused, defensively claiming that Vance men possessed no such flaws, while wrapping his deep-seated insecurity in a lecture about trusting destiny. Rather than forcing a toxic argument, I went alone, and my medical charts confirmed that my own reproductive health was absolutely flawless. Instead of searching for answers together, Owen took my compliance as an opportunity to quietly tell his mother that I was the source of our empty nursery. Nora, who treated her only son as an infallible monument to her own sacrifices, eagerly weaponized that narrative across our entire social circle. She began offering performative condolences to acquaintances at community gatherings, sighing deeply about how much Owen desired children and how tragic it was that some women simply were not built for motherhood. I stood by silently for years, mistakenly assuming that the sheer weight of reality would eventually correct the gossip without my intervention. My childhood companion, Chloe, was the one person I leaned on during those painful years of subtle social exclusion, completely unaware of her underlying motives. She would sit on my sofa, pouring drinks and offering soothing platitudes about how I did not need a child to possess value as a human being. In hindsight, her comfort always carried a subtle sting designed to keep me feeling deficient while she secretly tracked my husband's schedule. Deceptive people rarely steal your life in a single dramatic moment. They erode your boundaries piece by piece until you wake up to find them occupying your place. The end arrived abruptly when I returned from an exhausting night shift to find divorce papers waiting on the counter and Owen's wardrobe completely cleared out. Within days, he moved directly into Chloe's apartment, while Nora ensured that every resident in town believed I was a cold, career-obsessed woman who had failed her husband. I refused to defend my name online or plead with mutual acquaintances, burying myself in my hospital duties, where actions still had clear consequences. I swallowed the bitter taste of their deception for an entire year, falsely believing that my dignified silence would shield my professional reputation from their toxicity. The illusion of safety shattered completely when the chief of medicine informed me that a long-awaited promotion to department head had been awarded to a junior colleague. The credentialing committee had been thoroughly poisoned by the Vance family rumors, leading board members to question my emotional stability and fitness to lead under pressure. They looked at a decade of my flawless emergency room leadership and saw only the manufactured drama of my broken marriage. Sitting in my car that evening, I realized that my precious silence had not protected me at all. It had merely granted my enemies a blank canvas to paint me as unstable. A trusted colleague directed me to a sharp, analytical attorney named Sandra Finch, whose cluttered office smelled deeply of old paper and ink. Sandra reviewed the timeline of events, noting that while the emotional distress was immense, The loss of the promotion provided a quantifiable financial injury for a defamation lawsuit. She warned me that pursuing this would force me to unveil my private life, requiring me to legally demonstrate that the gossip regarding my health was an absolute fabrication. I felt a wave of anxiety at the prospect of a public trial, but Sandra's words reminded me that silence is no virtue when it actively destroys your livelihood. We officially filed the lawsuit, demanding damages for professional ruin and explicitly naming Nora and Owen as the sources of the malicious falsehoods. The community erupted with gossip, portraying me as a vindictive, grieving ex-wife who was simply lashing out due to bitterness over Owen's new family. Nora doubled down on her public statements, confidently asserting to her peers that she had only spoken the medical truth about my inability to conceive. Sandra smiled when the opposing legal counsel formally responded by claiming that truth was their ultimate defense, meaning they intended to prove my medical inferiority in a courtroom. By asserting that the rumor was factually accurate, Owen's legal team inadvertently blundered into a trap that Sandra had expertly anticipated from the very beginning. To validate their defense, they could no longer shield Owen's own medical history from discovery, granting us a legitimate legal avenue to request his sealed records. I recalled a specific afternoon early in our marriage when Owen had traveled to a specialized clinic in the city, returning home uncharacteristically silent and brooding. He had aggressively shut down any further talk of fertility testing after that day, a sudden shift that suddenly looked far more like a calculations than mere moodiness. The presiding judge reviewed our motion and decreed that since the defense had placed reproductive health at the center of the dispute, Owen's records were entirely relevant. Days before the formal hearing, I received a frantic midnight text from Chloe, begging me to drop the litigation for the sake of her newborn child. Her sudden panic revealed that the impending court disclosures threatened something far more volatile than a simple financial judgment against her new partner. Those who desperately implore you to stop unearthing the past are usually fully aware of exactly what is buried beneath the surface. When the certified files finally arrived under judicial seal, Sandra called me into her office and presented the single unredacted page that altered everything. 7 years ago, the city clinic had diagnosed Owen with absolute sterility, a permanent condition that made biological fatherhood an anatomical impossibility. He had known the absolute truth the entire time he allowed his mother to brand me as broken in front of our neighbors. The profound revelation brought no sense of immediate victory, only a deep, sorrowful mourning for the years I spent carrying a shame that belonged entirely to him. The clinical data also exposed a secondary, devastating contradiction that Owen had desperately tried to conceal from his own doting mother. If Owen was medically incapable of siring a child, the infant boy he was currently parading through the community could not possibly be his biological offspring. Chloe had evidently engaged with another partner, a man named Marcus Reyes, during the exact period she was maneuvering into my marriage. Marcus had recently deduced the timeline and was the very individual who walked into the maternity ward that afternoon, ready to legally claim his rightful son. The morning of the court hearing arrived, and the benches were packed with hospital board members and church acquaintances eager to witness the final judgment. Sandra presented our evidence with a calm, surgical precision, systematically reading Owen's definitive diagnosis directly into the public record. The courtroom transformed into absolute chaos as the reality of the deception settled over the spectators, leaving Nora entirely pale and trembling. When Nora aggressively shouted her familiar insult across the room one last time, I stood up and quietly remarked that she was completely correct about a structural failure, but the medical folder had only ever contained her son's name. Owen sat with his face buried in his hands as his legal team desperately scrambled to request an immediate settlement to halt further public exposure. The corporate hospital board promptly reinstated my promotion, offering a quiet acknowledgement that my professional character was entirely beyond reproach. I accepted the leadership role, stepping back into my trauma bay with a profound sense of lightness, knowing my name had been thoroughly cleansed of their dirt. Owen and Chloe eventually relocated to another region to escape the crushing weight of their own exposed lies, leaving behind a community that finally understood the truth. Before closing that chapter forever, I mailed Nora a brief, unvarnished note stating that I would no longer carry her son's burdens, and she should refuse to do so as well. The truth never requires a loud spectacle to validate its existence. It simply endures until the false narratives inevitably collapse under their own structural flaws. I glance at my grandmother gold watch each morning, reminded that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the courage to stand firm in your own reality. I am no longer hiding behind my duties, and the life I lead now belongs completely, entirely to me.